with my guy, my dude, colleague, whatever you want to call it, Brett Bader, Bader Sports Performance. Brett, I know you well enough. Person watching this or listening to this probably doesn't.
Probably not.
There might be a little overlap. But if you had to give them some insight, who the heck is Brett Bader? Like, where you come from, what are you up to, why are you up to it, what would you say?
Well, first off, I just want to thank you for inviting me to be on here. This is a pretty cool opportunity for me. It's good, anytime you get on anywhere, you can just start talking about yourself is always good if you ask me. But no, so my background, from Farmington, Missouri. It's where I went to high school.
Right.
Two-sport athlete at high school, wrestling, football. I chose the wrestling route once I got to college. I went to Missouri Valley College, where I wrestled all 4 years. A couple time national qualifier. So, decent wrestler. I would say wasn't the best, so with that being said, I knew wrestling after college wasn't going to be a deal. I wasn't going to go to the Olympics. I wasn't going to do any of that stuff. So I slowly wanted to find a route where I could still stay connected with athletes and train athletes. And so that's why I chose the sports performance route or your strength and conditioning route. But while I was in college, on my undergrad study, I was actually going to be an athletic trainer.
Okay.
That was my goal, was being an athletic trainer. But as I kind of did that, I was like, man, those guys work 70 plus hours a week and get paid nearly not enough. So, so all the respect to athletic trainers out there.
So you wanted to go more private.
So I went to more of the strength conditioning route, and then then my goal was, okay, I want to be a Division I strength coach. And then I did one thing fell in another, and I ended up doing on my own. So it's been good ever since, and it's kind of good to I would say work for yourself, but it's you don't have to answer to anybody. It's your training program, your time, your protocols, all this, and so it's been pretty good doing it that way. So
yeah, absolutely, and I can respect that. Obviously, doing like kind of the same path in some ways, like just basketball instead of weights, or turf or whatever you work with.
All the above.
Yeah, but I think about like just the way you frame that, and it kind of is a lot of overlap with me. Like early on, it could go a lot of different directions.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like you want to be around. For me, I want to be around the game. You want to stay around athletes. Basically the same reason. Like it could go a million different ways though. Right. And so it's like always interesting to me, like what got us here, because I myself thought about, do I want to coach high school? Do I want to coach college? Do I want to be like traditionally like on a staff and like work my way up and be a head coach or whatever? And then you just kind of find yourself doing something and really liking it, and you're like, man, I want to do that all the time. Right?
That's almost. I think if we had 2 days to sit here and talk about our paths, you'd probably see they're pretty identical. So once I graduated college, my old coach from high school, my old wrestling coach from high school, gives me a call. He's like, hey, you want a job? I was like, well, absolutely. I'm fresh out of college. I need a job. So, I was at the high school as a para for 2 years. Same as you.
I was a para.
I coached football and wrestling for 2 years. So we did the coaching route in high school. And I always kind of trained athletes on the side, almost like a little side hustle, no charge, because,
but it's extra experience for you, and it helps the athlete.
So that's how I always kind of stayed connected with, what I studied in college and what I really wanted to do. And then one time sitting in the living room having dinner with my wife, she was like, why don't you just do this, just to dive into it and see what happens? And for me, it was it's kind of a scary factor just to drop your salary job and just go right into making commission stuff. So, but she kind of all praise to her. She's the one that really pushed me to jump into that. And I did it, and I haven't looked back since. And she's always kind of been my staple with. Because same thing, to me, it's not about making X amount of money. I always told her, if it gets to the point where if I'm worried about the dollar more than the training, I should probably stop.
Absolutely.
And that's why for a while, she was like, you need to charge more for your, and I just had a hard time charging athletes, they're coming to me and they want to get better. So I'm like, it's hard for me to charge somebody who's just trying to better themselves.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's a business, too, so.
But that's a bridge I cross so often, right? As you probably do too, because we're always auditing what we're doing, maybe being overly critical at times, and I think to myself, like, I don't ever want to look at a player like a dollar sign.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because I just think that leads down a path that you end up you end up like behaving more in the short term as opposed to building for the long term, right? And I think the long term is where you can give people more value. You can really build relationships. You can, you know, do all that fluffy stuff, which is fun to talk about. But like you said, we still have bills, right? Like I got kids to feed. Like you have, you know, bills just as I do. You know, you and your wife have to, you know, make ends meet just like everybody else does. And so it's like, how do we have that push and pull of like taking care of others while also taking care of ourselves?
It's a fine line of chase your passion.
Exactly.
But you better pay your bills.
And I think it's fair to have like a little balance of selfless and selfish, right?
For sure.
As long as my selfish has pure intentions and I'm not like, you know, trying to use people, then it, like if I feel like I'm giving somebody value, then it makes me feel a lot better. So I think the challenge is like, for me, and you could probably say the same thing, my rates have largely been dependent on my demand. Right. So like I didn't want to arbitrarily enter the market and just be like, yo, this is what I'm worth because I think I'm worth it. You know, and like I did so much stuff for free up front or for like dirt cheap, or, you know, and I even remember like even after leaving high school coaching and deciding like, hey, I don't want to teach. Like I just want to do basketball. Right. For whatever it's worth. This is all I really like. And I remember I still had a side job, or like a main job, if you will, like a salary job. That paid my bills, and I was doing basketball training on the side with my extra hours each day, and I was just building it, not depending on it, right? And I'm sure in some ways that might overlap with kind of how you transitioned. It's just, you know, for me, I always hate thinking about like, man, do I need to raise my rates? But I think it's good insight for parents or players because, you know, they're looking at it from a whole different side of things, right? At the end of the day, like I still want to make sure my value is exceeding whatever you're paying. For sure. Right. And so like the rates might go up because of demand. That's just life. Right. But I want people to also understand that if I'm charging more, if you're charging more, then like try to put yourself in our shoes and think about how much extra time we're putting in to make sure we're worth that. Like in my ways, it's like rip out the safety net and, man, am I really up to stuff? You know what I mean? And that's where, like you mentioned Callie, you mentioned your wife. Honestly, there's so many times that I think to myself, like, man, am I really like, who am I? Like, do I have any business being a part of this basketball community, or like, you know, being a person in the space that demands money for time? Like, you know, what makes me worth that? And so I think as long as we're not going about it arrogantly, like, hey, no, this is what, you know, we're always auditing what we're doing. I think it's fair, you know? But, and that's kind of from a business side of things, right? I'm curious because I do have a lot of parents and players that I work with, obviously. Some of them you work with as well. We have some overlap with clients.
A little bit,
For their sake, for the person that's listening, that's maybe curious about how we approach that value. Like how do we, so like, you know, I talk about the business side of things, but now when it comes to like, okay, what does that value actually look like? When you're looking at a basketball player, right? How do you approach that process when it comes to like, hey, I'm a basketball player coming to you to get better at strength and conditioning or speed and agility or athletic performance? Like, could you walk me through that process?
As far as,
like say I was a brand new client and you were
in,
considering like how to give me that value. Like how would you consider that? Or kind of like what are the hoops or the checklists you jump through to kind of make sure you're giving that person what they need?
Well, first it comes between, right off the bat, I'm building a relationship. And I like always like to think in the back of my head, I always see you as a person first, athlete second, right? Everybody has feelings, emotions, and things like that. So I'm always, I'm picking their brain, asking questions, and then so obviously we're gonna start building goals. So there are goals. There might be stepping stones in between those, performance-wise, to get to those goals, right? So obviously the big one is I want a bigger vertical. Right? I want to be faster. Right. And obviously depending on position-wise, if you're down low, whatever it might be, stronger, you know, not get pushed around. So usually that first, you know, I want to get into their head, trying to, you know, decipher their goals. And then usually that first day, it's more like I always say it's kind of boring, because if you, you know, ever creeped on my Instagram or any of my content that gets put out there, it looks, I mean, we're jumping all over the place, and that's right. So at first day, it's just some kind of initial jump landing testing, testing some basic strength stuff. And that just kind of gives me an idea of where you're at. And then that's generally what we need to work on. So say your goal is a higher vertical, but you're jumping landing with valgus collapse, like, okay, I got to fix that first, or else you're going to blow a knee out here in the near future. So normally it's those stepping stones between, and eventually we get to the point maybe, and every athlete's different, 3, 4, 5 weeks in, and then you start seeing some good results. The strength starts coming, the power starts coming, the vertical starts coming. You start coming to me and you're saying, oh, my last practice, I've never felt, I jumped and I levitated for another half second. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So that's when you start noticing things probably. And then, so that's generally how that first initial setup goes.
That makes sense.
But
so what I'm hearing is like relationship, obviously, like you can't really serve somebody if you don't understand them. Absolutely. Because each athlete's different, right? If you can't empathize with them and kind of see it from their point of view. And then build a rapport, make sure you guys are on the same page, and then context, right? So you obviously, like, whenever you're going through those baseline tests, you're ascertaining what they're strong at, and you're ascertaining like what their threats are, right? So like for you, it would be injury prevention. For me, I'm looking at their threats as like, oh, you're a point guard, but you can't handle the ball, right? Like things that you absolutely need to have, right? So I think that's it's interesting to hear because, it does overlap so much with what I do. That first workout is usually kind of boring.
I mean,
right. Boring to us maybe, but like.
So like I'll have, maybe it might be their second time working out.
Right.
Athlete comes in, and then I have a guy who's been with me for a year, and he may be in 8th grade. And this kid's a high schooler, and they're looking over at my 8th grader going like, oh my gosh, like that, I could not even do that.
Dude's getting after it.
Yeah. My he's like, don't let him discourage you. He's been with me for a year, So,
exactly.
But that's the goal, is to get to the point where, it's not about so much, it's always about movement, but to the point where it's always, we're past the point of like majorly trying to correct the movements. And now to the point of we're just letting it rip, and we're trying to be as most explosive as we can. We're trying to get every ounce of athleticism out of you. Right. So movement first is a big thing for me.
And I love that. Like, I know in the past you've mentioned to me you wish high schools would almost just like remove strength boards or like, how much weight are we pushing?
And I wouldn't say remove.
And I know that's an extreme.
There's going to be a lot of high school.
I know that's an extreme.
No weight for it. But,
but the emphasis on movement training, right? So I think that's worth talking about.
Yeah, I wouldn't say. You can always keep the records. Don't be like, records are good. There's always good to have goals and say, weight room records.
Get rid of them.
But don't put it the staple. Don't put it the staple of the whole program, because the average high school kid, they see that, they're gonna want to load the barbell up and just get after it and try to put the most weight on there as they can. Right. So movement is key. So I almost have a movement board first. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, I'm gonna try and break the squat record. That's my goal. And you get an athlete as a freshman, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? Absolutely. You have him for the next 4 years. Exactly. So you have a long time to build that goal to get to that board.
Well, shoot, some of these kids are starting to be exposed to it even in middle school. Right?
Oh, for sure.
Right. And
my youngest athlete's, I think 4th grade.
Yeah. It's all. Well, I'm talking about at like the school level. At the school level. Yeah. With you, yeah, absolutely, right. Yeah. But yeah, at the school level, they're even starting to. It's starting to creep down into the middle school a little bit. It seems like. I like a hot take. I like to put you on the seat, so I know you don't want to remove it. But I do think like the movement first makes a lot of sense, right? So speaking of like in that regard, whenever a basketball player, whether they come to you or whether you're like, I know you like myself, we go watch games, we go watch clients. What do you think are some commonalities where basketball players are deficient, right? So like some areas where you see like players struggling with movement whenever you watch them as an athlete.
So I always joke with my wife about I can't go to Walmart or whatever without automatically depicting everybody's movement and their gait, the way they walk. But as far as basketball is concerned, the commonality, the one thing I see a lot is generally, I was guilty of it too when I was in high school and college, was the lack of, I wouldn't say lack of care, but I guess the maintenance on the body. So getting up 20 minutes earlier and stretching, just simple stuff. Yeah. And so normally what happens is, they go to practice, they go to their day, they do their suicide conditioning stuff at practice, right? Hamstrings get nice and tight, and then never gets addressed. So usually I can tell you right now, you're going to have some hamstring weakness. Okay. And tightness, which is going to lead to your hamstrings insert on your back of your pelvis there, so it's going to cause that rotation forward of your pelvis. which causes you to slouch, which causes that low back bend.
Right,
So in your squat, so you got to think, if you're trying to squat with tight hamstrings all the time, that butt wink is just happening all the time, putting that pressure on that low back. Well, next thing you know, we're 6 weeks into the season, coach, my back's killing me, you know. Well, that's just how they move. And so with those tight hamstrings usually happening, you're going to get either, because of your hamstrings, the valgus collapse, which is knock knee. You ever seen someone jump and their knees come together? That makes me cringe, especially in a jump heavy sport like basketball.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's either due to those tight hamstrings, not because of that range of motion, or the inactivation, or just regular glute med weakness. So everybody knows gluteus maximus. Your gluteus medius is more located on like the side of your hips there. So the inactivation of those muscles will be able to pull your knees apart and be able to be explosive as you can and jump up and land nice and safe.
But you're saying sometimes we struggle just to even fire those things.
Absolutely.
Right.
So usually, it might be a mobility issue, or it might be a weakness issue where we got to build the strength up in those things, or it just might be an inactivation issue. So, say an athlete comes in and they're struggling with valgus collapse, they jump. It's like, okay, hold on. So we'll break out the old mini bands, put them around the knees, do some mini band walks, do some pull aparts with the band, just trying to fire those puppies.
Right.
And we'll have them jump immediately after doing that. And next thing you know, it's a little better. And then they fire, do the same thing, a little better. And next thing you know, they're jumping it out just from like one session. That's probably a bit extreme, but some athletes it takes a few weeks to get that muscle memory in there, but even longer. So
well, and I seem to recall, and this might not be accurate, so bear with me, but I think I remember you saying to me once upon a time that you notice, like, whenever you have a basketball player come in the gym and we're doing box jumps and stuff, we like to land on our toes or the balls of our feet. Like, what do you think, like, about that?
And you got to think of it.
Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is it just kind of what it is? Like,
I would say it's necessarily a terrible thing. I don't mind if you jump and you land toes first. Right. As long as your toes hit and you can come down to that flat foot and you can sit your hips back and control all that, that's fine. But most of the time you're on your toes, you land, your hips are right underneath you, or out in front of you, your knees are shooting forward, and you stumble forward with that, and that's where it comes to be out of control. So and you got to think fourth quarter, late in the game, you're jumping doing that. Well, there's the anterior rotation or pull of your knee. There goes ACL. There goes ankles. It's just hard to control. And that just comes from the nature of the game. When's the last time you've been on your heels in a basketball game? Maybe shuffling maybe a little bit. Your toes jumping.
It's a pretty three-dimensional sport, though. It's hard. So it's all quick reactions. And
soccer players are the same way. They're always on their toes, tip-tapping, bang, bang. It's a very toe.
I can see like volleyball being similar, probably. Except for like maybe when they stride stop, I'm sure they go like heel to toe before they elevate. But
that's just kind of the nature of the sport with always laying on those toes. And normally you don't even think about it until you're in an isolated situation like that. And then once you start thinking about it, you're slowly setting those hips back and coming down to those feet. So.
Right. I've always been fascinated, like whenever you and I talk about, kind of the overlap in what we do, how we approach that curriculum or that progression or that training. Right. And like for me, it's always been like no clown drills, right? Like I don't want to mess around doing a bunch of crap that just looks cool on your Instagram, but doesn't actually translate to your game. You know what I mean? And I think there's some value in everything, but you know what I mean? Like wasted time, gimmicks, or like cookie cutter stuff. You know what I mean? Like if you could find the workout on YouTube, I probably don't want to waste your time doing it. Right? And so it's like, if we can try to clean up the time that we're together and make sure we're as efficient as possible, right? Then I feel like going back to the value, I'm giving you the value for coming and seeing me. If it's something you can do on an app or on YouTube, I don't know if it's as valuable, right? And don't get me wrong, you can find great things on those, but you have to really search. Like you have to really weed through it. We've talked a lot about like whenever I do moves, something I mentioned to athletes, like other than competing and decision making and all those kind of intangible things, one of the physical things I think I do every single workout, whether it's finishing, defending, passing, handling, shooting, you name it, is we work on balance, right? Because I firmly believe that if you can always play from balance or play from balance as often as possible, you're going to be a more efficient player. We're not even talking about like speed at this point. Like maybe change of pace a little bit, but just simply like where you step, where you land, how you do those things, the length of your strides whenever you're driving to the basket or whenever you're changing directions or when you're coming to a pull-up. just paying attention to your balance, right? And like the biomechanics that kind of overlap with what you do, right? And I know that's why, like in the past, I've had you come in the gym and kind of warm athletes up, right? And that's why I still love sending guys to you or gals, right? What do you think about like avoiding the cookie cutter approach, and like how do we make sure that we're giving that extra value to everybody that comes in the gym? Like how do you structure your curriculum or your progression? You don't have to go like super in depth, but you know what I'm saying. So
right? Generally after we're done, like so movement's not an issue. They've done a lot of correction stuff.
Like you've addressed the threats, right?
So talking about balance, we utilize the BOSU ball a lot.
Okay.
And not to the point of where you get on Instagram, you see somebody
juggling and
I mean, they're
playing tennis.
They're throwing a medicine ball off the wall on the BOSU ball, or trying to hit a hang clean. It's like that's it's crazy. So
it's like an injury waiting to happen.
So either take off or laying stuff on the BOSU ball.
Okay.
Or we have we do a single leg squat, front foot's on the BOSU. So using a lot of letting your ankle work, getting your arch of your foot, and your feet are very important in a lot of stuff you do.
Yeah.
So letting that foot work around that thing, but you're also going through a movement. So we don't get extreme. I'm a big fan of do the simple things really good. But every once in a while, we work with athletes get pretty bored of the same. Okay, you're going to come in on Tuesday, we got deadlifts. Going to come in on Friday, we got squats. It's just like, it's very, and they get pretty routine and you plateau.
Exactly. Almost like a burnout type thing.
So we utilize, I'm a big fan of training athletes like athletes, right? I'll never knock on one way of training, whether it's CrossFit, powerlifting, this and that.
There's some value in everything.
Everybody has their own, Are you a powerlifter? You want to be a powerlifter? Train like a powerlifter. If you're a CrossFitter, fantastic. Go train like a CrossFitter.
Yeah.
Okay, but where you start crisscrossing, if you have a overhead athlete who wants to be, I say overhead athlete, baseball, volleyball, anything that's a lot of pressure with
like a quarterback.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they're over here not knocking on CrossFit. It is what it is. But they're doing 50 dumbbell snatches overhead, bang, 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 and then they're going to go throw a bullpen later, and they're counting pitches on bullpen, but they didn't count the 50 or 60 overhead presses they did later in the day in their workout.
So it's like wear and tear that they're not accounting for. Yeah.
And we put that in perspective with our athletes, but so we train our athletes like athletes, and so you think of I'll use basketball, very multi-plane sport. You're jump, landing, twist, turn, this and that. Well, it's kind of how we should train within a controlled environment. So obviously we do a lot of bump jump stuff. So you've seen this in the past where we do a box jump, athlete jumps up from the ground. We give them a little push in flight, just as if you go up in the basket, get contact up.
Yeah.
Okay, you redirect your flight pattern. You got to let your body correct that. So, and that's a very controlled, push. So that's how we kind of train all our athletes to be, landing and jumping and moving like athletes in multiple planes, which goes back to all balance and body control and all that stuff you get into all your practice stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, and I love like how we both kind of overlap with, athletes train like athletes. When it comes to a skill thing, for me, it's like basketball players. Let's train like basketball players. And like let's take those simple things. Let's find a creative way to rep them out as often as we can in a like controlled environment, right? And so like I like to do controlled chaos because to me, a basketball player training like a basketball player in a skill environment means that every single rep is going to be a little different. Like we do not dance. You know what I mean? I think in a lot of ways, like basketball savants hit the nail on the head whenever they say basketball is poetry in motion. Like I'm a basketball nerd, completely agree with that. However, like what does that really mean, right? Well, poetry isn't always a haiku. Poetry isn't always like rhyming. Like there's free verse poetry, right? And I think basketball falls more in line with free verse, where it's a little bit screwed up, a little bit different. It's kind of jumbled, right? But it makes sense when you look at the whole body of work. And so like every single possession is a little bit different. There might be, a misstep here or you lose your handle there, or the defense gives you some sort of curveball here. And so to me, like a basketball player training like a basketball player in a skill environment, it means we have to have controlled chaos. So I control it in the sense that I want to get a situational rep over and over and over again. Let's deal with that chaos a bunch and get good within that chaos and just simply adjust every time. But if you don't have the athleticism traits that you're referring to, it's freaking hard to handle that stuff.
It's a fine line of trying to mimic game-like. The best way to get better is play the game, right?
But we don't just want to roll the ball out.
You're trying to get a controlled environment in a game-like situation. Same concept, right? I'm not trying to destroy your joints, ankles, and knees by over jumping, all this stuff.
Right.
But so it's controlled like game-like movements, jump landing skills, hit movements in a controlled situation. So.
Right. And I believe in like I said, and you refer to like powerlifting, cross training, like CrossFit, like a bunch of different ways that you could train the body.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different ways you could train a basketball player with skills. I'm well aware of it. Like, and truthfully, some people might fall more in line with as a player, like maybe maybe the way I do things doesn't work for them as well. Yeah. I'm empathetic to that. I'm cool with that. Right. I think there's value in everything. The way I approach it though, and the way I see it is much like you said, wake up early, get some stretches in. Like, you probably warm your athletes up. Absolutely. In fact, I know you do because I've seen you work, right? And I've worked out with you. Obviously, you warm up your athletes. I still warm up my athletes. I still kind of scale and progress. Yeah. But I believe you need to do stationary ball handling. Do that crap in your garage. Yeah. Do it in your driveway. Don't come and pay me to put you through something you could find on YouTube. Yeah. Again, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like you want to do crisscross applesauce, handle the ball 40 times in a row. Fine, do it on your own. Yeah. Right? When you come to me, somebody's going to be guarding you. It might be myself, might be a peer, and you're going to screw up a bunch. Yeah. Embrace it, right? But it's like, how do we control that environment to where we're training in a game-like way, and you're training like a basketball player in a strength and conditioning way? Yeah. Like, how do we? Because wouldn't you agree that is ultimately why we see results?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's easy for us to sit here and pontificate, but you could look at any one of the athletes that has trained with us regularly, they're seeing results.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, it's translating.
I'll use, I'll always say consistency. I mean, my gosh. Yeah. We've had, I can think off the top of my head, I have a golfer who hits a 54-inch box jump.
That's pretty dope.
That's all power in the hits, right? I mean, it's all hit power. He's been with me for a year consistently, at least 2-3 times a week. Yeah. I have a 8th grade girl who went from barely doing a box squat with a bar. Now she's, box squat 225. 8th grade girl. Yeah. Been with me consistently 2 days a week for over a year. Consistency pays off in the and I say consistency, but it's focused consistency. Exactly. You can show up, but if you're not going to show up, right? It doesn't matter to me, So.
I think that's that hits the nail on the head, right? Yeah. Because it's like I never want to sell or try to convince somebody that I'm a guru or what I do is just so correct that you being exposed to my presence for a short period of time is going to make you a better player, and right? I
try not to take credit for any of my athletes. I mean, great, they come with me. My way of thinking is I'll give you the blueprint. Yeah. You got to make it work.
Absolutely.
You lead a horse to water, can't make him drink. You know what I'm
Amen.
saying? So.
Right. And it's like we always say, I'll be your GPS, but I can't drive the car for you, bro. Yep. Put the key in the ignition or push the start, do it yourself. I'll show you where to go.
So, I always,
That's why I won't take credit for athletes, right? Sure. I think I see a lot of clout chasers or jersey chasers who are just I spent 6 hours training this dude. That's why I'm a good trainer. Yeah. No, man. I'm a good trainer because I give a crap about who you are. Person. And hey,
that's why.
I give a crap about who you are, and I'm gonna be here for you and be your guidance. And then every time, I had a coach hit me up recently, who is gonna be on this podcast in a few weeks, and has a college coaching background. One of her players has trained with me for a year plus, and she's like, "Holy cow, she is a different player than she was a year ago." And trying to tell me, how much she appreciates me working with her and all this stuff, which is awesome, right? It's always a good feeling. Yeah. But I'm like, at the same time, that girl bought into coming regularly, and she was intentional and put in purposeful reps every time she came. You know what I mean? And she got extra shots on her own. I don't see her 7 days a week. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, it's all her credit. You know what I mean? And when she goes and puts her jersey on this season and scores and makes plays for her team and, makes plays on the defensive end, that's not on me. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm going to be there in the stands just like your parents. For sure. Just cheering her on, right? I'm not interested in that. Yeah. If I wanted that, I would have probably pursued something else that puts me more in the spotlight, right? Absolutely. And I don't know if it's kind of like you mentioned social media. It's kind of a give and take where it's man, we gotta stay relevant. Yeah. Social media is the Google of 2019. Yeah. If you aren't on there, people don't know who the heck you are. For sure. Right. Follow me on TikTok. But you know, at the same time, like I don't want to be a clown and be like, yo, look at who I train, look at who I train, look at who I train, like because I just think it comes across wrong. You know what I mean? You see that a lot, right? Speaking of who we train, you know what I mean? What sports do you regularly work with? Like you've mentioned golf, you've mentioned basketball, you mentioned football. Name it.
Yeah, dude, we got it.
Is that challenging? Having to bounce from like, or is it kind of fun mixing that all up?
It's challenging and it's fun in its way, but at the end of the day, that's my job, right? So not all of our athletes are a true individualized program for themselves. Even if they come out with it, if they work together, like say friend A and friend B want to work out together, great. But friend A and friend B have two different workouts.
Yeah. I think that's cool.
So we have I have times where I have a golfer and a volleyball player and a basketball player and all at the same time. Yeah. We're all doing all different stuff. You can't look at their workouts and find the same stuff. Yeah. Plus everybody has their own things to work on.
I love that. Yeah.
So I mean, we have anywhere, like I said, golf, basketball, baseball. I got a call this week, a gymnast. That's and that's probably challenging in itself because they're usually
it's a little different.
And they're beasts. It's gonna be hard to push those guys. But it all just fluctuates on what they need to work on and what their sport is based, right? Like obviously, I mentioned it's my boy Will Nichols. Shout out. He was one that he's my golfer that hit a 54-inch box jump, right? Yeah. Well, golf, a lot of power in the hips, great, but we're not doing jump heavy stuff like we would with basketball. Yeah. He's not gonna be jumping down the green with his bag, right. So it's just all different layouts based upon the movements of the game or their sport. So
okay, and I think that's cool because I do a lot of group training. I'll train a team, or I'll do my academy where it's small group workouts. I still do private instruction, but I think it's neat because in the same way I'm trying to cross that bridge where it's like, we're all training in a group setting because I want the competition, I want the decision, I want the decision making elements and like all that messiness that I mentioned. But at the same time, like you're all different players, right? And so that's where I'm really big on like what are your 2 or 3 focuses, right? And so like there's a lot of overlap where most high school players need to work on the same crap. At the same time, your shooting mechanics a little different than their shooting mechanics. Yeah. Your finishing ability a little different than their finishing ability. And so it's like trying to ride that line of we're training together, but it doesn't mean I'm not focusing on you as an individual. You know what I mean? I think sometimes that gets lost, right? Unless you're just in there seeing it on a daily basis. I was going to ask you a question, and I completely forgot what it was, which sucks. But this is why I'm such a great podcast host.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to run it back what you were just mentioning to me before I got on my tangent. You were talking about training different players, training different athletes, right? Gosh darn it. This is not good podcasting. Yeah, don't cut it. This is where like I said, control chaos. Yeah, I'm totally fine with. For the listeners, Brett texted me the other day. He's like, "What are we gonna talk about?" I ain't got a clue, bro.
I said I'd bring the coffee.
We're gonna press record and see what happens.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how much overlap there is between what we do, right? But at the same time, we probably weren't training the same way a couple years ago. Would you agree with that? Like maybe a couple of years is a stretch, but like when you started.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? I mean, like what do you think, what kind of progressions have you made as a coach?
And I think I just joking about this with Callie the other day.
Yeah.
I found it like one of my first athletes workouts back in my, arsenal of workouts, everybody's programs. And I was like looking at it, I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, what was I doing?
Yeah.
It was just very green. As in, I just graduated college, so everything was very just by the textbook.
Like generic.
And I wish they would make a textbook called, crap you don't learn in textbooks. Because as I first started, it was just like.
I'm gonna cut that because we're gonna make that.
Okay. When I first started, it was very by the book. But I learned real quick that's not how it works. You get your own twist on things. Train more game-like stuff. So looking back to now, it's like holy. You try and compare those two workouts, you would not think they came from the same person.
Yeah.
And that just comes from staying.
That's how it should be, though.
And,
right?
If you're worth a lick of anything as a coach, it comes from continued education and continue to be a player of the game.
Absolutely.
So it comes from my certifications to the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So my membership is through them, and they're always putting out literature, research, all this stuff. And you got to be a nerd of the game.
Absolutely.
So just like what you said.
Yeah.
So I'm always reading stuff, and I'm always in my brain trying to challenge what I just read, but I'll find another article that challenges that, and I'll compare them, this and that, and it's just always
not ever just taking it for surface level, but just like auditing and like figuring it out for yourself.
Once you stop, once you think you're the best guy there is, that's when you put yourself in a box.
Yeah. So, you want to stay like hungry.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll use a good buddy of mine when I moved to Springfield, and Patrick Poston.
Yeah.
My gosh.
Shout out, Pat.
Yeah. He just killed it at his was it Raw Nationals? I think he competed in. So he killed it in that. But I'll use him as an example. When I first, I'm very athlete based. I'm very athlete performance driven. So when I watch Patrick, power lift, I had so many questions. I'm like, dude, why are you doing it this way and that way? And then, he would sit the time and tell me, but it's its own way of doing it to be better at that way. So don't think you know everything, because there's somebody out there who does it. It's obviously a different sport. But like I said, I was dumb compared to
carry over stuff. Though.
I mean, I knew basics, forms of deadlift, this and that, but like the little, niches and stuff, the grip and this and that, I was like, oh my gosh, so I was always try to learn and don't think you know everything.
Right.
So.
Well, and I think that's interesting too, because there's coaches that coach different systems than maybe I would, or run their team a different way than maybe I would suggest, or perhaps they develop skills in a way that I wouldn't, but me getting more insight as to why they choose to do that, it really might lead to something else for me. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it might be a little unlock. Yeah, right?
It's not there's not a correct, I use an analogy, everything works, nothing works forever.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's why, I'm like, I don't believe in a certain way of deadlifting, a certain way of squatting, a certain way of that. I mean, that just makes it pretty, after a while, it's a one way of doing thing, and doesn't add a lot of variation to your athlete. Now, obviously, if you're a power lifter, there's only one way to power lift. That's the competition of it.
Yeah.
But for an athlete, we're going to sumo deadlift, we're going to conventional deadlift, we're going to, RDL, we're going to do all that. I'm trying to build versatile athletes, therefore they need to be able to move all different ways and move great in all different
Which means you got to know each of those things in depth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like inside and out.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's always a challenge.
Why I'd always pick Patrick's brain sometimes. I'm like, hey, why you do it like this compared to like this?
It might help you out.
Yeah, exactly. So, always try to find knowledge, content. And don't put yourself in a box and think you know everything.
Right. I know we talked about guiding players.
Yeah.
How much do you think it's on us to motivate them? How much do you think of that is intrinsic for the athlete versus extrinsic from you and I?
To a point, obviously, in the situation we run into, especially with youth athletes, is mom and dad want them to do it, and sometimes they don't want to be there. You'll get those, but then you'll get your players, who are older, they're more mature, they understand the concepts. Yeah. And I rarely have to say anything motivational to those guys. Yeah. Those guys, they come in, they want to get better, they want to work. And obviously we all have our bad days. We all have those days where it's like you wake up, you're like, gosh, I need a full pot of coffee today. And so there's some days like that, I'm like, hey, I have to kind of hone them, I'm like, hey, listen, like, hour focused, then you go pass out, dog. And that's like in the grand scheme of things, you're like, they understand, they get after it, and they crash right after. I've had someone fall asleep in the gym. They lay down. I keep Hercules at the gym. He's my dog, and they laid down with Hercules, was petting him, and they passed out for 20 minutes. But that was their day. I'm like, hey, they got their work in, they worked their butt off, and then boom, like, man, if you got to fall asleep like that, you must have been tired anyways. But, so.
And I think that's fair. It kind of comes down to each player, each athlete's a little different, right? And I mean, you mentioned sometimes the parents are more the driving force. Yeah. That really concerns me, for obvious reasons, right? And so like, it's always a fine line between the relationship comes first. And so I'm just grateful for being around the player to begin with and to be a different person in their network. Yeah. But I'm also grateful for the opportunity to work with parents. Right? Absolutely. I think it's a sin as a coach to look at parents as a problem. I know so many high school and college coaches that just complain about parents. Yeah. And I understand it to a degree because, there's moments where we could probably complain about everybody, ourselves included, right? Absolutely. Like nobody's perfect. At the same time though, it's like, we're all in the athlete's life. Like we're all in a circle around that athlete that's in the center. Exactly, right? And so like myself competing with high school coaches makes zero sense. No. Why would a high school coach and I not try to work together if we're working with the same player? Why would myself and the parent not try to be on the same page?
I'll tell you why. Egos get in the way.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Which is if we run it back to nobody's trying to take credit.
No,
and it shouldn't be a problem, right?
You gotta, hone everything back, run everything back to what's the goal? Yeah. Make that guy the best guy he can be, or girl, whoever might be. That's the end goal, is make the athlete the best athlete you can. So we're all on the same team,
right?
Whether it be high school coach.
Well, and then like you and I have had life after competing.
Yeah.
Every player is gonna have that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The best players in basketball, like, rarely make it to 40. I'm gonna tell you that. Most of them early 30s is kind of the end of their career.
Yeah.
Let's say they're a healthy individual and makes it to 100. That's only like a third of their life.
Yeah.
So it's like we don't want them to reach that last 2/3 of their life and have no like sort of context or ability to cope and manage as a human being. So it's like, how do we help them as an athlete? How do we help them as a person? And I have to believe that like arguing over them and the best way to work with them is probably not the way to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, that's a challenge I embrace. Is like every family dynamic is different. I never want to try to tell somebody how to parent because I don't want to be told how to parent.
Oh yeah.
Because obviously I don't know what's going on in your bedroom and inside the confines of your household or whatever. Every family is different. But it's like when we step between the lines on the basketball court, like every one of those basketball courts in Southwest Missouri has the same dimensions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now we're all on an equal playing field.
Yeah.
We need to figure out how this player is going to fit in that environment with other players and coaches, and how are they going to handle that place? You know what I mean? And it's probably the same for you, right?
Same concept, except basketball. For every 45-pound plate weighs 45 pounds.
Exactly.
Every bar weighs 45.
Yeah.
It is what it is. So
yeah.
But it's basically the same thing, just transitioned differently. So
yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. You know what I mean? Like everything weighs the same as far as the plates go, right? We got the same dimensions on a court.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with that? Right, it's like the cliche, like we all have the same amount of time in the day. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Right, which I think a lot of cliches are founded in truth. Obviously, right? Brett, I appreciate you, man. I'm gonna leave you to it. I know you got to get to the gym.
Yeah.
So do I.
But thank you for having me. It's been awesome. For anybody who's listening and curious what we do, you can follow me on Instagram, Beta Sports Formats. Give us a follow on or a like on Facebook. Any questions, always can DM me, ask me away. I'm always giving out content for free, man. I'm not a guy. I don't have the secret to the world. I just want to help every athlete be better. So
exactly. And honestly, like for those listening to this, they're obviously following me if they found this podcast. Hit me up if you need Brett's info because I'm always sharing that with players.
Appreciate it.
For good reason.
Yeah.
Right. All right, man. We'll leave it at that.
Thanks, man.